Hello and welcome back to Triple Crown Wargaming with me, the Duke, in what will be the last of these types of videos for this week anyway. And I am looking at Magic. So I've already taken a look at the 4 phases of the game. The strategy, movement, shooting and combat phases. Go check out those videos if you haven't watched them already. But today I'm going to take a look at Magic, as it's probably the single biggest thing that has changed from 8th edition to the old world. So in all the other videos, I just sort of focused on those changes really, rather than going through the whole phase. With Magic, I'm going to sort of gloss over pretty much all of it, because to be honest, most of it has changed. So you still get levels of wizards, there's no change there, 1 to 4, and you've still got laws of magic, although the laws are different. Spells and spell generation is pretty much the same. The only exception to that is, so you still roll your dice to decide what spells you've got. However, if you roll a double, then you re-roll that result. There's also nothing to say that 2 wizards on the same law can't know the same spell. So previously, the only way you could duplicate, or you could always duplicate signature spells, but the only way you could duplicate another spell is if it was on a model with the Lawmaster special rule, and then another wizard without Lawmaster could have it, in 8th edition at least. In the old world, it doesn't look like that's a thing anymore. You know, you can have the same spell on 2 different wizards, even if it's not a signature spell. So a bit of a change there. But you don't get to choose if you roll a double, so there is that as well. The types of spells are slightly different. There's 6, so you've got enchantments. They're generally augments, or what would have been augments. Hexes, which are what hexes were. And now it does say that for both enchantments and hexes, the sort of duplicates of the same spell has no effect on the same unit. You can keep casting them on different units if you've got them multiple times, but duplicates of the same spell on the same unit has no further effect. It also says that hexes and enchantments are cumulative if they are different. So if you have 2 hexes that both, I don't know, reduce strength, for instance, then those are cumulative. However, they can never take any characteristic above 10 or below 1. So the next type is conveyance spells. So if you've watched the other videos this week, or if you've gone through the rulebook yourself, you'll know that these are done in the movement phase, and a unit can't be affected by the same conveyance spell more than once per turn. Magic missiles and vortexes, these are both very similar. They're up next, done in the shooting phase. Now, generally for spells, you don't need line of sight. They just need to be in the wizard's front arc, which is actually a big change for enchantments, and hexes. Whereas augments and hexes, you didn't even need arc of sight, you just needed to be in range. Now you do always need to be in arc. But for magic missiles, you also need line of sight, because they're essentially a shooting attack, but they automatically hit. You don't need to roll to hit. Same for magical vortexes, got to be in your front arc. However, they don't need a target. A lot of the time you just place the template anywhere, and then it either stays there for some of them move. And then assailment spells, so these can only be cast while the wizard is in combat, and these are cast on the unit that the wizard is in combat with. But yeah, they can only be cast while he's in combat, which is a departure from the generic rules of choosing a target, which says that spells can't target units engaged in combat. Which I don't mind. At first glance, you might think, oh, that's, really unfortunate, because it means I can't hex my opponents or buff my own troops. Well, actually, a lot of the time, you are still going to be able to do that, at least on that turn you want to charge, because you're going to cast these spells before you charge, because hexes and enchantments are done in the strategy phase before you would then, roll your charges, get into combat. So, additionally, you are going to know if your opponent's hexed or you're buffed before you decide to declare that charge. So, at first, that might seem like a real shame, but then actually, particularly with the rules around the break test in combat as well, if you haven't already, check out yesterday's video on the combat phase, as I go through the different types of sort of flee almost, and what happens when a unit loses combat. The fact that actually after every combat you're going to have the option, if you are the winner, to stay out of combat. Even if, the opponent doesn't flee, you're going to have that option to stay out of combat, so you can then cast your spells in your turn if you want to. like I said, you also need to... The target must also lie within the wizard's vision arc, they call it. But generally, they don't need line of sight. Magic missiles and vortexes are the exception. And then, obviously, the target's got to lie in the spell's range, obviously. There are some spells that are range self. So, they don't actually require a target. They're just cast on the wizard. Some of them also then have an aura effect, which is measured from the wizard. But a wizard can cast a ranged self spell while they're engaged in combat. So again, that's another departure from that general rule of not being able to target a unit engaged in combat. Self spells, self-range spells can be cast while the wizard's in combat. Casting works... Well, casting doesn't work the same. There's no power dice. I was going to say casting works the same, but that's just objectively not true. Power dice aren't a thing. When you want to cast a spell, you just roll 2d6. Then you add your wizard level. So there's no sort of resource management, which I do think is a big shame, to be honest. I've said so before as well on the channel. But you just need to equal to or beat the casting value, which is the same, to successfully cast the spell. Now, some spells have boosted values. Now, previously, you'd have to declare if you're attempting the boosted value. However, in the old world, you just say, I'm going to do this spell. Say, I don't know, the base one casts on a 7, the boosted one casts on a 10. Then you just say, I'm going to cast the spell on this target, roll the dice. If you roll a 7, 8 or 9, the base level cast. If you roll a 10 plus, the boosted level cast. You don't have to declare which level you're going for, which is nice. I do like that. Magic resistance as well. This sort of more plays into Dispel, so I feel like they've put that in the wrong place, to be honest. But obviously, magic resistance in 8th edition gave you a save against damage from spells. So useless against most hexes and things like that. However, in Old World, magic resistance is now like a minus number. So you see magic resistance minus X in this case. If a spell targets a unit with magic resistance, you take off whatever's in that bracket from the casting roll. So if I'm magic res 2, you take off 2 from whatever you roll to cast the spell, which obviously can then mean you fail to cast it, or it makes it easier to dispel. Magic res doesn't add. If you've got 2 sources of magic res, you just get the best, same as it's always been. But I massively like that change for magic res. Big fan of that, actually. Miscast and what they've called Perfect Invocation, or what used to be called Total Power in 8th edition. Forgot what it was called then. So Perfect Invocation is on a double 6. Obviously a lot less likely now. You're only ever rolling 2 dice for a spell. Well, outside of certain items, but you're only ever taking the 2 highest at least for a spell. This cannot be dispelled in any way. So it's effectively what was a Total Power. However, a miscast is on a double 1. So you can get a Perfect Invocation, and that's not a miscast. There's no downsides to a Total Power. What was a Total Power? The miscast is only on a double 1. And then you roll 2d6 and consult this table. Now, interestingly, I'll say it, on an 8+, so about half the time, the spell still goes off. The spell still counts as being cast. On an 8 to 9, the spell's cast at its base level, for the purposes of dispelling, but you can't attempt to cast any more spells for the remainder of that turn. Not the end of the world. On a 10 to 12, it's cast as if it was a Perfect Invocation, so it can't be dispelled. I think that's really... You've just rolled a double 1, so miscast, something bad should happen, but then you cast your spell with Perfect Invocation, they can't even try and stop it. And yeah, again, you can't cast any more spells for the remainder of your turn. Not great, but not bad. You've still got Dimensional Cascade, though it's nowhere near as horrendous as it was. It doesn't have the chance of just killing your wizard. None of them do, to be fair. They just do some hits. A couple of them are templates. One of them is just... I think it's just the wizard. Yeah, just the wizard on a 7. Careless Conjuration. Just the wizard takes a strength 4, AP -1 hit. So, miscast, much less... damaging, much less scary, to be honest, and like I say, almost half the time the spell still goes off anyway. And I'll get into dispelling in a little bit, it's just over the page, but there is a chance to miscast on a dispel, and you use the same table, but you just swap wherever it says cast for dispel. So again, even if you double 1 on a dispel, you've got the almost 50% chance of still stopping that spell. Not sure how I feel about that, to be honest with you. Bound spells, just quickly. So previously, bound spells, their power level would be what you need to roll to cast them, and then you don't add any wizard level or anything like that. Now the power level is what you add instead of a wizard level. So you roll 2d6, add the power level, which can be 0, you can add nothing, and then you have to equal or beat the casting value of the spell. So the sort of casting value of it doesn't change. It doesn't get easier to cast just because it's a bound spell. But the power level you add instead of a wizard level, and they can still be dispelled in the normal way. You can also only ever cast a single bound spell per phase. So no matter how many you know that might be able to be cast in that phase, you can only ever cast one of them. So, like I said, Dispelling, right over the page. There's 2 types. There is a Wizardly Dispel, which is, unsurprisingly, done by a wizard. And there is a Fated Dispel, which you get once per turn. Every army gets this. You can make it, and if you don't have any wizards, or you don't have any wizards in range, because there are ranges to Dispelling, you can always make a Fated Dispel, which is just a straight 2d6 roll. You don't add anything. The Wizardly Dispel, though, there are, like I said, ranges. So if you're a level 1 or 2 wizard, then you can only dispel if the wizard who casts the spell is within 18 inches. If you're a level 3 or 4 wizard, you can only dispel if the wizard who casts the spell is within 24 inches. So still a benefit for having a higher level wizard. Also a difference for Dispelling, you have to beat the casting value rather than just equal it. So you have to beat it to dispel the spell. Now, interestingly, there is a little quick reference sheet that you get. I assume you get it with every rulebook. I got my rulebook in the Bretonian Army box, and mine came with it. So if you just bought a rulebook and didn't get it, then they only come with the army books. The army boxes, rather. But on the quick reference sheet, it says you need to equal or beat the casting value. But the rulebook itself says you have to exceed the casting value, and if it is equal to or less than the casting result, the dispel attempt has failed. So I would go with the rulebook. It's definitely going to be an FAQ super early on, or at least, a little something from Games Workshop to clarify that, but I'm 99.9% sure it's going to go with how it is in the actual book rather than the quick reference sheet. So you're going to have to beat the casting roll to dispel it. So another little pip against the Dispeller there. You've got to be in range, which, okay, probably not the end of the world. You're probably going to manage that, but certainly not always. But then you also have to beat the casting roll, not just equal it. And it's not like you can even go, well, I really want to make sure I stop this one spell, so I'll save all my dice for it and, throw with a massive dice advantage. You can't even do that because it's just a straight 2d6. Like I said, you've got the possibility of effectively miscasting with Dispelling, which is called Outclassed in the art. You've also got the equivalent of, what was it called? Perfect Invocation, that's it, for Dispelling, which is an unbinding. So no matter what the casting attempt was, because it could also obviously be above 12, the casting attempt, if you roll like an 11 plus wizard level 3, that casting attempt is now 14. No matter what the casting result is, if you roll a double 6 on your Dispel, it dispels it. Outclassed in the arts is what happens on a double 1 when you dispel. When you're attempting a wizardly dispel, though, you can't miscast on a fated dispel because there's no wizard to take the miscast. You can unbind on a fated dispel, so you've always got that option of just throwing your fated dispel on a double 6, you stop it, which is nice. But yeah, like I said, you roll immediately on the miscast table to see what fate befalls your wizard, changing references from cast to dispel and from perfect invocation to unbinding. So if you double on it, there's an almost 50% chance you've still just stopped the spell. Yeah, mad. Not a fan of that. But it's not going to happen that often, is it, to be fair? Double 1 on 2d6. 1 in 36. It's not going to happen that often. All of this sort of stuff, spell resolution, spell duration, that hasn't really changed, to be honest. They'll most likely say on the card when they last until sort of the next turn. But you do still have remains in play spells. Now, you can dispel remains in play spells either when they're cast, like a normal spell, or you can attempt to dispel them in the conjuration subphase of any of your subsequent turns. So that is when you would cast enchantments or hexes. So that's in the strategy phase. So go check out Monday's video. We'll go through that a little bit more. But that's when you can try and dispel remains in play spells in sort of subsequent turns. And like in 8th edition, you only have to then beat the base cast value, not what they were originally cast with. Or cast on, rather. Same with if they're cast with perfect invocation, you can still try and dispel them in subsequent turns, just not when they're originally cast. One thing to note, though, to dispel remains in play spells in subsequent turns, you still have to be in range of the wizard who cast that spell, you know, depending on if you're a level 1 or 2 or a 3 or 4, either 18 inches or 24 inches of the wizard who cast it to attempt that dispel. So it's not in range of where the spell is, wherever it's moved to. You've got to be in range of the wizard who cast it. Something to note. Final little thing, wizards and armour. Wizards still can't wear armour, apart from, you know, certain exceptions. But their mounts can still wear barding, because it's not the wizard themselves that is wearing it. So that's magic, really. I've always been very apprehensive, I've got to say, about the magic not being a phase. I was going to say the magic phase, but it's not a phase. That's what I'm apprehensive about. I've had one game so far. The jury is still out. I think from what I've seen as well of other games being played, I don't dislike it anywhere near as much as I thought I would. I've got to be honest. It's a lot better than I was concerned it was going to be. So, yeah, definitely want to give it lots and lots and lots more time. Lots more games to really make my mind up. But generally, I think the thing about it not being a phase, the fact it's spread over the game, actually I think I'm quite happy about. I think what really is still holding me back is complete lack of resource management. It's just 2d6s. You can cast as many spells as you want or as you got. Even if they'd said, you know, you can only cast a certain number of spells. You could cast 1 or 2 spells if you're like 1 if you're a level 1 or 2, 2 if you're a level 3 or 4. Even that gives you some sort of resource management to manage over a turn. But as it is, you can just cast as many spells as you've got. Yeah, but let me know down below what you think of that. How you think, if you've played a game so far, how you found the new magic system to work. If you've just watched some games, then what you think of it. And just in general, what you're most looking forward to checking out in the old world when you do get a game in, or what you most enjoyed about the old world if you have already played a game. But thank you for joining me here across this week, checking out the new phases as well as magic in the old world. And yeah, that's going to be it. We're going to close the big blue book. And if you're watching this at the time of release, we will be back on Sunday with our 3rd Old World Battle Report. But for now, we will see you next time.
Remember to tag your friends and like, subscribe and share. Then head over to triplecrownwargaming.com and become a Knight of the Realm today.
What are you doing, mate?
You alright?